you everyone for chiming in and seeing this conversation today. The topic for the November webinar series is Mentoring Today, and it features Brian Murphy, the CEO of Quality Deer Management Association, and Matt Kormann, the CEO of the Archery Trade Association. And together with their staff and with these gentlemen, we've developed a kind of question series that we'd like to pose on the topic of mentoring. Brian is a mentor himself, and Matt is a new hunter himself, going and becoming a mentee. So we have two different perspectives here on the mentoring process that we hope these gentlemen can share their insights and experiences and help everyone on their webinar today understand their next steps in becoming either a mentor for somebody or finding a mentor for themselves. So to get started, gentlemen, could you please tell us a little bit about who you are and the organizations you lead? And Brian, why don't you kick it off?
Sure, thank you, and appreciate everybody taking time out of their busy day to be with us today. And thank you, Sam, and to the Council for allowing me to participate, because this subject is very near and dear to me personally as well as professionally, and I think everybody on the call knows the difficult situation we're in to reverse the decline in hunter numbers across this country, which in the last 5 years we've lost nearly 16% of our hunters, just over 2 million. That's the largest decline since the Fish and Wildlife Service has been doing their surveys since the 50s. So it's obviously we're in a tough spot, and we're going to have to reverse this trend. My name is Brian Murphy. First and foremost, I'm a lifelong hunter. I'm a wildlife biologist, and for the last 21 years, I've served as the CEO of the Quality Deer Management Association. And for those that may not be familiar with us, we are a 30-year-old national nonprofit wildlife conservation organization. And our mission is pretty straightforward, and that's to ensure the future of white-tailed deer, wildlife habitat, and our hunting heritage. And we'll talk a lot more about our efforts in the hunting heritage arena a little later. Currently, we have 60,000 members across the U.S., Canada, and abroad.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brian. And Matt, would you like to share a little bit about the Archery Trade Association and your experiences there?
Yeah, thanks, Sam, for having me as well, and Brian for putting up with my end of this conversation. Is just not on this call, but as well as in person, and the education that I've gotten from you over the last few months, getting to know you personally. It's been certainly been a huge help to my hunting experience. For those not familiar with the Archery Trade Association, we represent pro shops and manufacturers of archery and bow hunting equipment, not just manufacturers of archery and bow hunting equipment, clothing manufacturers, accessories, ancillary items that might be related to bow hunting and archery. So we're a pretty broad group of folks, and we're really working to grow those sports of archery and bow hunting while also respecting the history that we've been entrusted to preserve. We've got about 18 staff all over the country, and while we're often thought of as a trade show organization, and that part is true, we've got our 2019 event coming up here in Louisville in January. We also do quite a bit of work on the government relations level, both federal, state, and locally, and a lot of services, various services to our members. We've struck a lot of partnerships with organizations, for example, like QDMA, where we feel like we can help each other grow not only the archery and bow hunting side of the business, but as well as those individual interests, for example, in preserving whitetail habitat and conserving that species so that for future generations can enjoy them. And we do a lot of marketing communications work as well that serve all of those other efforts.
That's very cool. Between the two of you, I think we have a lot of the hunters represented as well as a lot of the industry represented, and coming together on this kind of common topic of mentoring, getting more people outdoors is definitely a unifying message that I think can span across all NGOs and industry partners. So I'm excited to have this conversation and have you gentlemen online for this call. We'll start with mentoring is a topic on many R3 community members' minds, a lot of those people sitting on this call with us today, and at the forefront of many R3 efforts of our partners, including your organization. I thought we'd start with this conversation on mentoring today with some discussion on your personal experiences in mentoring. Each of you have recently become active in the hunter mentoring process, and could you share with us a little bit about your experiences there? What have you been doing in the last year or so, and why have you taken these activities up? And Matt, since you started down the path of referencing your relationship with Brian in the last couple months, why don't you start there?
Yeah, I got the itch to bow hunt when my daughter and I took up target archery half a dozen years ago. And I didn't grow up in a family that hunted. I didn't really have any close friends that hunted. But when I started to get into the archery side of things as a competitor and just as a recreational shooter, I really got that itch. But it was so intimidating for me to get started. Fast forward a few years, and I wind up in this role with the Archery Trade Association. I can't imagine a situation where I could be surrounded by better mentors, and I've really relied on those folks. I've been very fortunate in that regard because I've really been thrown into it with a bunch of experts. But I don't think my experience necessarily needs to be unique. You know, I really didn't know where to start, even when I started in this role a little more than a year ago. But I asked a lot of questions, and I had folks even coming out of the woodwork who I wasn't asking formally, who were coming to me saying, hey, think about this. Think about these things that you should bring and not bring into the woods with you. Think about these ways that you should behave and not behave in the woods. And I've really been able to expand that into turkey hunting this spring with Dan Forster on our staff, and I really view Dan as, even if he doesn't know it, he's become a really kind of in-the-woods, action-based mentor for me. We're also have, you know, the benefit of having gotten to know Brian, and Brian has become sort of the habitat and species mentor for me around whitetail, and his staff have been incredibly helpful in that regard as well. But then I think it hasn't even stopped there. I've identified a couple folks that we work with here at the ATA who are really into cooking and cooking wild game, and I love to cook. And so I've even got cooking mentors, I think, for wild game, because one of the complaints that I think some folks who don't really understand the process is, how do you deal with that game after you've taken it? And I think that's an important piece to remember. I think there are all these offshoot opportunities that we don't think of, and I think it does start on the mentees side from being willing to ask, and then on a great mentor's side from being willing to share regardless of who that person might be.
That is very well said, Matt. I think I've seen a lot of those kind of interactions happen too. A lot of people underestimate their ability to become a really good mentor. But once asked, when that question is posed to them, they step up to the challenge and accept, you know, the responsibilities to show someone the ropes of hunting, just as their perhaps mentor showed them. And now, Brian, you've had that ask recently, haven't you, in your experience with perhaps some of the programs QDMA has launched, or even with some of your colleagues?
Well, absolutely. In fact, my relationship as a mentor, even before I knew what that word meant, dates back really to my childhood days. I was that somewhat rare, over-the-top, really over-the-top hunter and trapper and fisher person, and decided at age 12 I was going to be a wildlife biologist like all 12-year-olds do. And just because of my overzealous engagement in the outdoors, I typically attracted questions from novices, and we didn't even know what it was called then. I was just fortunate enough to love it so much I wanted to share it, and have been able to do so with perhaps hundreds over the years. But I want to give a couple of more recent examples over the last couple of years, because my mentoring has changed from that, what I would call a traditional pathway, traditional rural white men sharing information with each other. That was kind of my upbringing, kind of how I related to hunting. Over the last years, through QDMA in particular, and even some of our staff, I've had the opportunity to mentor a number of women, some of those on my staff, a number of youth, but in particular some that don't think and come to hunting in the same motivations that I was used to. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But one unique example is, in fact, the lady who's on the photograph that's being used for this webinar. And this lady works down the hall from me. Her name's Melissa, and she came to us a few years ago. She works in our accounting department. And we started asking our staff, because we thought we owed it to ourselves to look internally first and make sure we didn't have people in our immediate sphere of influence that wanted to hunt, and lo and behold, we did. One of those was our senior accountant who I took last year, and she was successful in harvesting a deer. And so this year, Melissa asked, but yet she's unique in the fact that she doesn't know yet if she's ready to harvest an animal herself. She wants to sit with me, and she wants to watch me harvest a deer if I'm so fortunate to do so, and see how it affects her. She's even willing to carry a crossbow with no bolts in it yet and just kind of pretend, if you will. But I think that's a real good lesson here, because everybody comes to hunting in different ways, different speeds, And I think it's really up to the mentor to understand that each situation is very unique, each person is very unique, and you don't try to instill your value system on them. You just simply make it a welcome environment and cater to the diversity of motivations and capabilities. And that's kind of the real take-home message that I've gotten, particularly with more diverse hunter groups that I've dealt with over the last couple of years.
Really interesting advice. And I was wondering if this picture was of your colleague down the hall you had mentioned. It sounds like you both are experiencing some of the benefits of the mentoring process, both personally and professionally. Can you describe that first mentor or mentee experience you had? Did you have any concerns starting out? And was it what you expected heading into it? And maybe, Brian, do you want to take this one since you kind of went into that a little bit already?
Sure. I gave that some thought because again, just because of my upbringing, it was a little difficult for me to think back who was that first person I influenced. But then it became very clear to me, and it was my younger brother. When I was about 10 years old, I was an avid small game hunter in rural Oklahoma, and my younger brother expressed an interest in wanting to hunt. And growing up in a single-parent household, I was the de facto male, therefore the de facto mentor. And so I taught my younger brother how to hunt. And that was kind of, now fast forward into sort of my adult mentorship here. And what was really interesting is our first group of Field to Fork participants, and these are men, women, typically adults that come out of our local community, but increasingly across communities around the U.S. We had a group of very diverse people, all types of genders and ages and religious beliefs and everything in between. And quite frankly, I was a little bit intimidated at first meeting because I had always communicated to what I would consider, in air quotes, traditional hunters. Again, those mostly from rural America, mostly white males. And this didn't reflect that. This group of people largely didn't reflect that. And so I was concerned that I might not be able to communicate effectively with them, or we might not share many of the same commonalities, love of the outdoors, love of sunrises and sunsets and things that the nature experience offers. And boy, was I wrong. I was enriched beyond belief to a point that I was probably more motivated and more stimulated mentally and emotionally, spiritually, than I had been with many traditional groups, because it offered unique perspectives, and it also showed that we share a common bond, and that common bond for most of these people was food. It was not the size of antlers. It was really about the experience, the spiritual experience, and being able to put healthy organic meat on the table. And just one anecdote there that I'll leave you with before I turn over to Matt is, just as an example, one of the young ladies who was successful in harvesting a deer, when the cameras came out to take a picture, she backed away quickly and she said, no, I don't want a picture with this. That's just kind of wrong. I want to celebrate the animal, but I don't need to be there with it. And again, everybody's different, but it just shows you that you have to be aware of those differences and accepting of those differences if you're going to be a successful mentor.
Again, some really, really insightful things. Being intimidating as a mentor, I can totally relate to that. I'm wondering if that is a similar experience on the mentee side, Matt. Would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah, totally. I was really concerned. As eager as I was to go hunting that first time, I was really concerned because here I am in my 40s, an older dog trying to learn a bunch of new tricks all at once and trying something completely new that had pretty significant consequences. And the fact of the matter is, once I started having those conversations with folks that I trusted, that concern evaporated almost immediately. Bow hunting has a ton of components. We all, of course, have a responsibility to know what our skills are before we head out into the woods. But it really, I think the biggest takeaway I had was it really wasn't as hard to get into as I first thought. Sure, it's complex. Sure, you need to do some self-education, some mentor education, but I think it's a lot easier than we give it credit for, because there is, I think, such this barrier. I think Brian referenced it perfectly. We have this concept of who a hunter is if you put that stereotype in your mind, and I think that hurts us as a community, as an industry, because we tend to try and preach to that same choir over and over again, and that's a dwindling group. I think Brian was wise to point that out at the top of the call in terms of how many hunters that we've lost nationwide, and our industry is certainly experiencing that. And I think just starting that conversation, it's not just the recruitment piece, it really is the retention piece as well around R3, because you're not just creating that new hunter, recruiting that new hunter, you're also ensuring the retention of that mentor because of how engaged they become. And maybe one of the most surprising experiences I had was that spring turkey hunt this year. I was able to, right place, right time, thanks to Dan Forrester putting me in the right place at the right time, but was able to take a Jake at about 35 yards with a shotgun. And while I was securing that shotgun, before I'd even looked back up at the bird, Dan had run up from 30 yards behind me and was hollering at me, "Did you get him? Did you get him?" He was literally more excited about it in that moment than I was. Now, the excitement came as soon as I walked up and realized I'd made a really good shot on the bird, but it was that to me was an incredible experience, an incredible, I think, connection about how it's as or more exciting for that mentor can be as it can be for the mentee.
I can definitely relate to that. I think the common trends are at first intimidation, but then excitement through the experience for everyone involved. Maybe at different times too, Matt, kind of how you explained it. That kind of leads into our next question, though. Like, how did your relationship with your mentors and mentees evolve over time? Do you just have one individual you worked with, or were there many? Matt, it sounds like you had many. And how often are you interacting with them? Are these weekly meetings? Are these texts back and forth? How does this work? And Matt, you had commented maybe it's not just recruitment, it's more retention too. So perhaps you could take this question.
Yeah, and I've done a lot of business mentoring as well and been a business mentee, and those are really structured interactions where we schedule half an hour or an hour once a month, and we keep to those schedules pretty religiously. Because it's a professional setting, there's an expectation of how you behave with a professional mentor. That's not been the case for me here, and that was, I think at the start, that was also a little kind of off-putting to me. I expected to have a lot more interaction in an ongoing way, but I think looking back, it worked out well. You know, it started out very regular. For me, it was a lot of email, a couple of phone calls when I wasn't sure, and then it was a lot of time one-on-one in the field. You know, there's some things for me with fear of heights, I couldn't get over that unless I had that mentor with me at the tree stand. And there's a lot of stuff that we could take care of with other folks, either by email or by text or a quick phone call. And those really kind of taper off. And now as the season kicks back up, I'm reaching out and of course, asking more questions, more specific questions. But I also think it's important. I think this is the one constant between business mentoring and hunting mentoring. The onus of responsibility is really on the mentee. It really needs to be the mentee's responsibility to be able to have the confidence to reach out on a regular basis anytime they need something. But the mentor needs to foster that relationship and ensure that they're comfortable enough to do it. But it really is my responsibility to reach out to those folks that I know and ensure that I'm getting what I need.
That's some really great insights as a new mentee coming into the field, being accepting of a mentor's ideas, but then also being the one to reach out to them when you need information. That's a really key point there. Now, Brian, is Matt texting you a lot while he's sitting in the stand getting over his fear of heights? Is that how it goes down?
Well, yes, no, and sometimes. I mean, I think what I've learned over the years is you have to meet your mentee where they are and where they're comfortable. And I sat in a bow blind last fall with I think he was 10 or 11-year-old little Kentucky kid, and he's not gonna email me. He's probably not gonna call me, although he has once, but he has texted me and Facebooked me a lot. With Matt, he's more my age demo, so we're more likely to email first, and certainly once on stand, we'll text or something, of course. And I think each person's different. Some of my earlier mentees will pick up the phone as often as anything. And so I think the key is just making them feel safe and comfortable to ask any question anytime. Sometimes the mentee engagement is literally one text, and sometimes it's an hour-long phone conversation or a 10-minute exchange of emails over what set of boots to buy or what caliber's best or whatever their questions may be. So it really is just understanding, who you're dealing with, what's comfortable and best for them, and not trying to force your communication strategy and timelines on them, but just making yourself available to them.
Very cool. I like the consideration of the different age groups too and how they communicate. Being flexible as a mentor seems to be a key process or key aspect in this process. Now it sounds like both of you have. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say I'd benefit from being on Instagram. I'm just not there yet. I'm trying.
Yeah, with time, I think people will get there. And it sounds like both of you had rewarding experiences in mentoring, and perhaps the process hasn't stopped yet. I often get questions from friends and colleagues on this topic. Some, like you, Matt, are trying to find that perfect mentor for themselves, and others, like you, Brian, are considering becoming a mentor themselves. All of them are trying to determine those first steps to go down this pathway. So after your experience for a couple years now, what advice or tips might you offer to the listeners on this webinar to help them take that first step in either becoming a mentor or becoming a mentee today? And perhaps, Matt, do you want to start?
Sure, and I'll come at it from both angles there. For mentors, and I've seen this mistake made a couple of times, where we tend to focus on mentoring as a target audience of kids. And I think we need to ignore the age thing, ignore the demographics, because it's not just kids. And it's also not just adults. Brian said it perfectly. We need to find mentees wherever they are and whomever they might be. For mentees, you got to be really honest. We tend to fall back to that old saw that there are no stupid questions, but that doesn't really ring true when you're the one about to ask what you think might be a stupid question. I've been really careful to tell each of my mentors to talk to me like I don't know anything about what we're about to do, because oftentimes it's the case, and sometimes I just need a refresher. And then I ask a ton of questions, and I think that's important for mentees, especially new mentees. Ask a ton of questions. Even if it feels like it should be obvious, ask. We're participating in a sport, like I've said before, it has a lot of consequences, and most of them positive. And as an example, I already referenced this, but if I had not talked to Greg Brown in those first couple of days out in the woods about my fear of heights, I probably would have never climbed into a tree stand. And I cannot tell you how much I love being up in a tree now, and I'm afraid of heights. But I've built that confidence because I had somebody walk me through the process really carefully, understanding what that fear was, and really worked pretty quickly to get me over it. Now, if I got a few hours to spare, there's no place I'd rather be at this point.
That's some key advice again. It's interesting how some of the simple things keep you from starting it, but then once you take that first step, you really see the opportunity before you. Brian, what advice might you offer from the mentor side for that first step in going down this path?
Well, something we found both personally and through some data that we've gathered over the years through the various programs we've offered is that there's kind of two perceived big barriers out there. There's probably more than that, but two come to mind very quickly. And one is a lack of confidence among the mentors. Many of them don't feel that they're qualified enough, they're expert enough to be a mentor in hunting. And I equate that to parenthood. How many billion people are there on the planet? We can all work it out eventually and figure it out. And you're going to make some mistakes, and they'll appreciate those as a mentee. The second perceived barrier often is that it's harder to find a mentee than it really is. And we found it remarkably easy on our staff to start with, on other organizations, and even firearm industry companies' staffs. We're finding a target-rich environment, no pun intended, of willing mentees that have not been asked. So right in our own, work environments, church groups, social and civic groups, schools, they're everywhere, and it's amazingly easy to find them. And another one is, there's often a perception, particularly in today's day and age, and coming from a deer organization, we see it more often than most, that there's a perception that they have to take them on a deer hunt right out of the gate. And that's great if you can, but quite frankly, it might be better to start them on a small game hunt. And if someone doesn't have access to take a mentee on private land for deer hunting, there's abundant public land, small game hunting around this country that's quite good. So there's a lot of opportunities to get engaged. But and a final point, I think I referenced it earlier, but don't try to force your beliefs on them. If your desire as a mature whitetail hunter is to only harvest mature animals because that's what you want to do, that's great. don't try to force that on a new hunter. If their only motivation is meat, then the first little yearling buck that walks past, or a legal animal, let them harvest the thing and be truly rejoiceful in their success. And so I think just create a safe environment for them to be successful, and let them decide why they want to hunt. We need all hunters with different motivations, and not just those that think like ourselves. In fact, I think that's the biggest potential pitfalls if we try to make them think like ourselves.
I think that's pretty solid advice. I wrote down, don't try to force your beliefs on them. It's kind of one of my key takeaways again. You all both have offered great advice, and now I know your organizations are also helping people to become mentors themselves. Could you tell us about what your organizations have done recently or will do in the next year to help your members and others form their own mentoring relationships? And Brian, why don't you start?
Oh, absolutely, and this will take just a couple of minutes, because I want to give a shout out to Hank Forrester, our Hunting Heritage Program Manager, because he has truly been a leader of a lot of innovative thinking in this arena and really helped guide us into a position that I would say is doing as much in this arena as just about any conservation organization in the country. And it's not all recent. We did start with a mentor guide process a decade or more ago that we've been offering, because we saw these trends coming, as many did. We also have, and that's free and available to the public on our website, just a step-by-step process of which the hunt is well late in the game, like the second to last step. We also have a Field to Fork program that I mentioned earlier. Many on the call would be aware of it. This thing is really shown to be quite successful, where we use food as the primary motivation to attract adult onset hunters. The hunting continuation of our students in the first 3 years has approached 80%. I challenge any mentor program in the country to boast an 80% retention rate. And the beautiful thing about these adults is that they self-select to learn how to hunt, so you would expect a higher percentage retention. But the very next day, many of them are buying equipment and bows and guns and continuing to hunt. And the other thing we found about the newbies, as I call them, is they're tremendous advocates for hunting. They're so excited that they share it with people, and often share it with people that would not naturally be reached through traditional channels. That's a program we offer. We also have a Share Your Hunt program, which is our grassroots program. Historically been a youth-targeted program through our chapter volunteers. Also been very successful. We offer 3 national mentee hunts throughout the year, one in Georgia, one in Texas, and one in Kentucky. One of those is a youth firearm hunt, one is a youth bow hunt in partnership with Scholastic 3D Archery, and one is an adult firearm hunt. So a diversity of those, mainly to gain awareness of those at a national level. We do have a partnership with Scholastic 3D Archery that we really think has tremendous potential, with literally tens of thousands of young people who have an interest in becoming a bow hunter. And we provide educational materials on deer and deer hunting. But also we're looking to connect their clubs with our branches, our local chapter volunteers. We have just recently launched a digital mentor program in partnership with Powderhook, and that's starting to gain some ground. We also have kind of ownership of their deer camp mentor program within their platform, where we offer, we not only offer it here, but we offer it everywhere. We produced an electronic guide to deer hunting, our deer hunting ebook, and that is widely downloaded across the country. It's extremely popular, tens of thousands of downloads. And Hank and his team are working on a video and guide for teaching adult onset hunters now, and that's a partnership with NSSF. And finally, we do all these things because we want to make a difference. And a year ago, we set a 5-year goal internally in our organization to mentor 1 million new or beginning hunters, roughly 200,000 a year. And I'm delighted to say that our first year we just squeaked by. We rounded up to 201,000, but we made it. And so we have touched 200,000 hunters over the last year in a positive way. So we're very excited about kind of the progress we're making there, and wanted to see it continued and expanded.
Yeah, you guys definitely have a lot going on. Just for clarification, one of the retention rates you cited was 80%, and that was a number of participants in Field to Fork that went on to buy a license the next year. Is that accurate?
They continued hunting within the first 6 months of the program. After completing the course, they continued hunting within 6 months. I think it was 78% the last time I ran the numbers, or something pretty close to that. but whether it's 70 or 80, it's still that's a very, very high retention rate. And again, they're contributing with Pittman-Robertson excise taxes. They're buying licenses. This is all good for hunting conservation. It's good for us all. And I just want to see it expanded. And this year we did expand the Field to Fork program in 8 states, expanded it outside of its pilot project area, which was right here in Georgia. And 13 hunts will be conducted this year, and we just want to keep expanding that each year and gain some scale.
Awesome. And as a non-government organization, an NGO, you definitely have a membership that you can call on to step up to be mentors. Now, from the industry perspective, Matt, as a trade organization, you have mentors, private entities, who can be partners for projects like this. But is it the same approach that you guys can take in rolling out programs and everything? Or what is ATA kind of looking at this for the next steps or mentoring for your industry?
Yeah, it may sound counterintuitive, but we're trying not to be the ones creating and rolling out new programs because we've seen organizations like QDMA, S3DA, any number of organizations, state agencies who've had really great success creating and modeling mentor programs. So what we see our role as is trying to become a centralized resources for those best practices. We're trying not to reinvent the wheel, and we do intend to make it easier for virtually any organization or even individual who feels called to mentor to improve their mentoring skills or programs to be able to do that more effectively. So yeah, we're working with those other organizations who've got a proven success rate so that we can wrap that knowledge up and distribute it more broadly. We're working, as our board determined, it was one of the most important elements in our strategic planning effort that we began this summer that will continue for the next 5 years or so. But one of those immediate term expectations that our board gave us was to create a mentoring guidebook that attempts to wrap in those best practices and make an attempt at standardizing this is how this can work because it's worked in other places, and here's sort of almost a step-by-step guide to getting there, and then being a resource for new bow hunters. And of course we can wrap in existing tools that we've been using for years, like Explore Bow Hunting, Explore Bow Fishing, and also leveraging platforms that we've got that have great reach, like bowhunting360.com, to try and get folks that basic information they need. But it is astonishing to me how much great information is out there. But I would say, prior to a year ago, for me, I didn't know how to really get it really cleanly. I had to go out and search and find it myself. And I think in this day and age, that's the less and less done. I think folks want ease of access and ease of use regardless of what their age is. We've become expectant to be able to get all the information we want on any topic really, really easily. And our goal is to serve the broader industry and the broader bow hunting and hunting communities by trying to become one great element of that.
That's really interesting because on the communication aspect of it seems to be critical, whether you're interacting with the individual mentors and mentees or even just people trying to find the right information. I think generally we all know the right stuff to kind of go down that path. It sounds like the packaging, though, is what's going to be a key going down the path, this next step. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think so. As an example, there are great videos out there that I can consume when I want them. I watched a series just this week on field dressing, skinning, and butchering a deer. And I feel like after watching that, in a pinch, I could probably get that done. But the reality is I'm hoping to harvest my first deer with Brian a phone call away because I'm more of a tactile learner. I need to do it hands-on. If I'm fortunate enough to do that near Brian, then my goal is to not let him touch my deer. I want him to talk me through it while I'm performing that skill myself. But the resources are out there. For example, those kinds of video resources, but you need to kind of go find them, and we're trying to make that easier.
That's awesome. I know a lot of people have been creating programs and thinking about how to help mentoring move forward and find those mentees. And these sound like fantastic opportunities for your members in the greater archery community. We're excited to share more information on these efforts moving forward. And just to allow the audience to ask some questions, we've been getting a lot of correspondence just about details of programs, and I think we've captured a lot of those insights, sharing links with Explore Bow Hunting 360, the handbook, Brian, that you referenced. So it sounds like there's a lot of interest in the products you all are putting out there. So we have gotten a few questions through social media about this webinar topic. And audience members, if you'd like to ask any other questions, please feel free to type them in on the bottom right-hand corner. In the meantime, one of the questions submitted via Facebook that I thought perhaps was interesting, especially on the topic of bow and bow hunting, was that many mentors, including myself, struggle to mentor due to equipment costs, particularly in bow hunting. What are your best tips for mentoring and bow hunting on a budget? And Brian or Matt, which one of you would like to address that one first?
I'm happy to, Brian, if you want me to jump in, or you can go.
Absolutely. Go ahead, then. Go ahead.
I think there are a lot of options, and actually I'm going to call out QDMA and their Field to Fork program. They have built up an inventory of crossbows because they have found that that's an easier point of access for a brand new hunter, someone who's never been out in the woods before. And I think that's also a tool that can be used, a bow hunting tool that can be used between different individuals. Much more challenging to do that with a recurve or vertical bow than it is with a crossbow. And so I think there's an opportunity there to use the right tool in the right situation. I also think there's less appreciation and credence in the bow hunting world for what I might refer almost inaccurately, though, to infinitely adjustable bows. It was the first compound bow that we ever bought my daughter when she started target shooting. One of those that we could dial from 15 to 60 pounds and draw length out to 30 inches and as short as 16 or 17 inches, and a lot of that equipment is really reasonably priced. And yes, there's a huge challenge. There can be a perceived huge challenge of cost of entry, barrier to entry on equipment, but I do think especially for someone who's got a great relationship with a pro shop. I know for a fact that first pro shop that we bought a bow from, if I needed to go back in and adjust it, they were going to take care of me. And if I needed to adjust it so I could take someone else hunting with me, if I was at that point in my hunting career, I know that they would be happy to do that for me. Those are a couple quick hit answers, and I know it doesn't address the problem completely, but we continue to work with industry to ensure that those kinds of concerns are heard. And I think industry, by and large, has responded with equipment that, I think the press releases tend to focus a lot on the high-end equipment, the highest-end equipment. And so the entry-level stuff or the less expensive gear doesn't get all that much love when equipment releases roll around. But I'm here to tell you, I've seen it firsthand. Those manufacturers are very careful to ensure that they're putting equipment out there that hits the entire market, and I think that's important to consider.
I think that's really wise insights. A lot of people have talked about different product innovation that's out there that could suit different target audiences that are kind of stepping up. We know women, for instance, are becoming an increasingly growing segment of hunters, so there might be some different equipment that can be offered. So it's great to hear that the industry is looking at that and that opportunity. Now, Brian, what were your thoughts on this question posed?
Well, Matt pointed out one approach. We kind of have two approaches. One is to develop our own cadre of equipment that we can loan out and let folks use, and that's not just here in Georgia, but have some repositories of equipment scattered across the country that can be shared. That becomes a little problematic when you have a footprint as large as ours, which is essentially 2/3 of the U.S. Effectively. But we also rely on our individual members, and we find that most of our individual members, if they're motivated enough to hunt and to want to teach someone else how to hunt, they've got a spare something they can loan. They can find a friend who's got a crossbow. They just have to work a little bit harder to do so. And if someone making this or having this question out there is anywhere near one of our local branches, we provide a whole kind of kit in a box for some of these events, whether it be a membership for the participants, insurance that protects the mentor and mentee, vests, orange vests, certain gear, background checks. I mean, we do a lot for them at no cost. That's something that we have to fundraise for, obviously. We have to either get grants or take it out of our general operating funds, but it's something that we feel is so important that we do so. And so there's a lot of ways to get there. It's just a matter of which best fits a particular mentor, where they live, and what they're trying to accomplish.
Okay, that's very helpful to know, especially for local resources. It's very insightful, and having kind of access there seems to be a critical part of this or component of this when stepping up as either a mentor or a mentee. Another question we've received is something for you guys to think about. How have you thought about how you would go about recruiting other mentors? What language might you use, or what might you do to encourage other people to step up to become a mentor? And Brian, maybe do you want to start that conversation?
I'll give it a crack. Me personally, it's enriched my life. Hunting has enriched my life. Being around people that hunt and share the same common passion has enriched my life. But I find new hunters with that zeal, particularly those that didn't even know they had it. I was at a hunt recently, and a young lady who described herself as a recovering vegan is now one of the greatest ambassadors for hunting, who kind of fell into it late in life and didn't even know that spark was there. But once you see it ignited, it's truly rewarding. I don't think we're going to affect hunters as much on an intellectual basis in terms of it's just your responsibility, although it is. And I think we have to find a way to have a complete paradigm shift moving forward, much like we've attacked social things like drinking and driving. In the hunting sphere, things like, displaying your game inappropriately, backing up to McDonald's with your tailgate down and blood dripping off. We've largely fixed some of those issues through social peer pressure, and I think we have to have a similar paradigm shift with a fundamental understanding that if you're a hunter today, it is your obligation, your responsibility to recruit at least yourself, hopefully more than yourself, as a hunter. And, I think that's somehow we have to get that message to other mentors. And those are the two ways I would do it, intellectually and emotionally, probably.
Really good advice, and really good things to keep in mind, too, just from the public perceptions of hunting and everything. Matt, maybe a little bit of a spin on this question, too. You're still in the early stages of becoming a hunter, or being sort of advancing as a hunter, we'll call it. Have you thought about becoming a mentor yourself down the road someday? Is there any kind of, magic click that you think will happen that you feel confident enough to mentor somebody else?
Yeah, absolutely I do, and that's my goal, is to learn enough to be able to give that back, to give that gift back that I've received. And I can tell you unequivocally that I'm not there yet. I know I'm not there yet. I don't have the experience. I think there are certain things that I could help. I feel absolutely confident in coaching somebody up to be able to shoot a bow pretty accurately. But getting them out in the field, I could start with that, but I wouldn't want them relying on my very limited experience in doing that. So I'm trying to get out as frequently as I can to gain that experience. There's nothing that will give that to me as much as time will. But I think several things have happened. I haven't had a single mentor experience where that mentor has been kind of ho-hum about the conversation we've had. And the most recent was this past weekend, Saturday morning. I'd made what I think was a no man's land shot on a very young buck, and Brian and his daughter Lauren and a couple of his folks were out helping me try and track that thing Saturday morning after I'd put an arrow through it Friday afternoon. We never found it. We never found blood. We never found anything else. But I can tell you the passion that Brian imparted to me about tracking and how to go about that process. But then at the same time, every time we paused, sharing something about the woods that he was seeing, whether it was rubs or whether he was pointing out where the deer like to bed down, the passion that came through in that just made me really eager to get to that point to be able to share that with somebody else. In the same way that Dan Forster running up screaming at me, did you get him? You get him? You got him! When I shot that turkey this spring, it flipped a switch for me. And I think that's what's necessary. And I think Brian has touched on it. we can appeal intellectually to folks all we want, but it's really telling that story and getting the emotion ramped up that will really flip that switch for somebody else who might be a great mentor but hasn't yet considered it, maybe hasn't yet had that experience that has caused them to really want to get out and do it.
That's really cool. The passion is more than 50% of the equation, perhaps, is from both the mentor and the mentee. Maybe on the mentee side, it's just a general inquiry, drawing back to what you said about the mentee being constantly asking questions and engaging the mentor. Perhaps it's a passion is an underlying theme that makes relationships between mentors and mentees better all around. There's a question submitted here from Jen Bennett. Sorry, Jen, if I said your name wrong. I know you're in California, though. And she acknowledges that this probably isn't an issue anywhere else but mentoring in California. But it is illegal to borrow a firearm unless it's from an immediate family member. Any ideas on how to get past this barrier? Of course, for bow hunting isn't limited by this, but this limits kids from hunting, especially if they aren't strong enough to bow hunt legally. Is there any kind of suggestions on that from your perspective, guys? Have you come across perhaps any limitations in equipment borrowing in other states or in your experiences?
Maybe I can speak to the bow hunting piece really briefly. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
Mine will be quick. No, we have not experienced that, and I feel incredibly sorry for Jen because that is a huge barrier that shouldn't exist. I don't have a good response for you.
Okay,
on the bow hunting side, we have been asked. Our technical committee has been asked to try and come up with regulations that include a lower end range for draw weight, so that states can ensure that kids are pulling bows that are strong enough to ethically take an animal, harvest an animal. So we continue to work on that, and we expect to have those recommendations back out to state agencies in the near future. I have no answer for the firearms piece, although I do wonder if there would be some possibility to get some sort of waiver from the state for a hunting club or a pro shop club that would be performing that function as a mentor, as a teaching tool. I don't know. California might be the one state where you might not get that, just based on politics out there. But I'd be curious to find out if that's something that could be done. Get a waiver on a club level or something along those lines.
Yeah, it sounds like there might be some opportunities just given kind of the structure, and maybe some of our industry partners, maybe even a ranger or retailer can help with that too. It sounds like there's some other options as well, Jen, so I'll follow up with some resources. And it's good to know, Matt, that resource on equipment levels and recommendations are coming to state agencies. We'll be looking to share that with the archery community in the future too. We also have another question from Autumn Christensen. She says, I took my older brother out for the first time. He was very excited about everything up to the point of when we approached the dead doe. He said, I felt horrible for the deer. She just died. He was uncomfortable seeing all the blood. I assured him, being a double-lung shot, that she died quickly and she will not go to waste, parentheses, food. I guess my question is, based off how my brother felt about seeing the dead deer, what would you have said to that? Because I feel one hurdle to get over when being introduced to hunting is coming to terms with the direct death of the animal. Any advice to tell new hunters? And Brian, why don't you take this one to start, and then we can follow up with Matt. Sound good?
Absolutely. My response, and I mentored both of my young daughters, and they were with me at very young ages in the deer stands and seeing, dead deer. And I had different reactions from both of them. None of them were overly negative, but I do think it's important on that first experience, because that is a life-changing sort of epiphany when you see a dead animal right in front of you, that if that's not something you've grown up with. And the way I would put it is, this animal lived a better life than the other animals we commonly consume, cattle and chickens and swine. It lived a wonderful, healthy life right up to the time it died. You did your job as the hunter and harvested legally and ethically and humanely. That animal felt almost no pain. It was a rapid kill, again, at very low stress levels, because it lived a free life right up to that very moment. And the other thing is, the land it came from can produce those animals sustainably at very low impact to the world. In fact, it's obviously a sustainable, renewable resource. Compared to the inputs it takes to grow the cattle and chickens we eat and so forth, are just not even comparable. So that's the only way I can explain is that this is again, a renewable resource, and it's no different than eating a hamburger at McDonald's. The difference is that you're actually the ones that obviously harvested the animal versus paying someone else to do so in a slaughterhouse somewhere else.
And Matt, was there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think Autumn's answer was great. I think as she said it, I don't know, especially, Autumn, your brother, obviously, and I think you know the right things to say. I think that's the other role of a mentor, is to really get to know their mentees so that when they hit one of these potential roadblocks, they know them well enough to be able to pick up the right words. I wouldn't want to script that in advance. I think she nailed it.
Awesome. I would come from the same perspective. It goes back to the quote I wrote down: don't try to force your beliefs on them, just work with that relationship to understand what's going on and help them have an experience through it. One other question I want to pose up here to the group is kind of on that aspect of participants in the industry. I think, Brian, it was you that said, some people in your own organization were interested in hunting. They never really just had the person ask them to go. And Matt, from your perspective, coming into it, you've been very open about picking up the sport, writing blogs on it for the Archery website, Archery Trade website now, just communicating with other industry partners about the opportunities before us. Is the pool of participants in our own ranks that big in your opinion? Do you think that maybe that's another low-hanging fruit or target audience we could go after? And Matt, why don't you start with that one?
I think it absolutely is. I think we take it for granted. I think in the same way that a lot of folks assume mentoring should be kids, I think a lot of folks assume that mentoring is outside of our ranks. And I think that's a mistake. There are all sorts of folks. I know that we have folks on the ATA staff who've never hunted, and we're absolutely asking them and talking to them and giving them the opportunity to do so. Certainly not a requirement to work here that you do so, but we're absolutely looking inside our own borders. I think the rest of the NGOs, state agencies, other industry organizations owe it to themselves and to the future of the sport to do the same. I think by and large they would probably assume that they're doing so, but I think that's a dangerous assumption until you ask and really kind of survey the population that you have right in front of you. You don't really know. I would bet that, Brian, were you maybe a little surprised that you had folks within your own four walls that didn't hunt but had a desire to?
Absolutely. In fact, we were pleasantly surprised when we started just asking down the hallways. And what really struck me is, probably about 3 years ago, I had the good fortune, my daughters and I, of being able to harvest a really large number of antlerless deer on a property that we hunt. And so we had a surplus of venison. And so I kind of put out the word down the hall, who wants a deer if I have an extra one. And, man, the hands went up about as fast as you can count by non-hunters. And it wasn't long after that we hosted a Learn to Hunt course within the building, and I don't know, had 5 or 6 people take it out of our whopping 18 staff here. I mean, we're talking about a third of our office staff wanted to try hunting. And so, we've started that process of mentoring several people in the building, and so far it's been tremendously rewarding. And then, Hank, our Hunting Heritage Program manager, gets contacted by a young lady who had learned about our program, worked for a major firearm company up in the Northeast, and said, how do I get something like this going? And before we knew it, we'd partnered with Ruger and Sig Sauer and offered a Learn to Hunt program through our Field to Fork, essentially, program there, and had to cap it at 24 staff. So we had 24 people within our own industry in 2 companies. And that we probably could have had 30 or 40 if we had the teaching and instructional capacity to take them through it. So I think we are woefully underselling the interest that exists within our own industry. And I see industry being the broader hunting, conservation, archery, shooting industry. There's a large number of people out there waiting for someone to walk up and put their arm around them and go, hey, you ever thought about deer hunting? I'd be happy to take you and teach you.
It's definitely a perfect way to offer it, too. I think we've seen a lot of people just kind of change the conversation. At one point in the industry, perhaps you hid the fact that you weren't a hunter. And now the paradigm shift maybe is the fact of celebration that you're not. And if you want to learn how to do it, here's a network of people who are willing to show you. If we can get to that point, I think there's a lot of opportunity in the future, too. It's definitely some interesting things that we've talked about today. Thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your insights and your experiences. I know a lot of people have had questions on how to take that first step in becoming either a mentor or a mentee, and I think after hearing this webinar today, they have some very good insights on how to go about that process. Just to offer you guys a chance for some final words, do you have anything else to offer the audience on the topic of mentoring? Any kind of sage advice or last thoughts you'd like to share? And Matt, would you like to go first?
Sure. I think this is at the same time a more challenging and easier challenge than we give it credit for. It's really tough because Brian, I think I'll kind of close how Brian opened. We've seen such a decline in hunters without enough hunters coming back in to support a system that is decades beyond when it was designed, and really not prepared for that loss of hunters into the system to support conservation. And so it's so critically important. But it's also a heck of a lot easier than I think we give it credit for. I think I'm living proof of that. Yes, I've been fortunate to be surrounded by really great folks, but there's no reason that my experience needs to be markedly different from anybody else coming in new to the sport. I think if we remain more open-minded than we give ourselves credit for, if we look more closely than we've typically looked, I think it's easy to find folks that we can bring into the woods. And again, it's not just deer hunting. It's any opportunity to get folks out, give them that experience. I love the stories of having somebody come out and just tag along and see what it's like, and creating that spark in that way. I think there are any number of ways that we can bolster the recruitment side of this equation that will pay huge dividends for a lot of years to come.
Very wise words. Brian, what are your thoughts?
Well said. I'm an eternal optimist, and despite the huge challenges that lie before us, not just with hunter decline, but things like chronic wasting disease and others, I am an eternal optimist, because if you look back just a little over 100 years, we almost had no large game in North America. We had just about wiped out every deer, every elk, every turkey, every goose, you name it, almost all were gone. And we had the wherewithal and the resolve to restock and replenish our wildlife resources to a point that they're the envy of the world. There's no country in the world that has the abundant resources that are available to the common man and woman. We have a big challenge ahead of us, for sure. And I like to quote a gentleman named Alan Kay. Often he's an inventor of the Windows operating platform, whose quote is, "The best way to predict the future is to invent it." And so I think we have the opportunity. We must. It's not an opportunity. It's absolute must to create a model of mentoring that allows us to stabilize first and hopefully to grow hunting numbers. And to do that, we're going to have to be more inclusive, more tolerant, and more aggressive and more innovative than we've ever been. But, if the future of hunting and conservation in this country is going to survive, which, and by the way, deer hunting drives about 78% of that economic value nationwide for all wildlife that we hunt, I sincerely hope that we as a community can have that resolve and can make it happen, but I believe we can.
I think a sense of optimism is a great way to leave this webinar off. Thanks, Brian, for those last words. For everyone on the call, we have recorded this session, and we will put it up on our webinar series on the Council's YouTube channel. I did provide a survey link for you guys to provide your feedback. If you post some questions in there, perhaps we can ask these gentlemen to fill in some questions if they weren't answered, and we'll post them in the archery community too. So thank you, Matt and Brian, for taking time out of your busy days. I know as the CEO of a company, it's very hard to come by an hour of your time at times. So thank you for sitting down and taking some time to talk about mentoring with us. I think a lot of people can learn from your examples, and we look forward to working with both of your organizations and your staff and yourselves to make sure that that optimistic perspective is shared and we get more people out there mentoring and becoming mentees. So if there's any other questions, please type them in the chat box on the bottom right-hand side, and we'll collect those up, complete the survey, and look for the webinar recording on the Council's YouTube channel in the next week or so. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time.